This is my 3D printer. Now get out of my office. This is my CNC router. This is my laser. And this is the Snapmaker 2.0. It does all three of those things poorly. That's not true. It does all three of those things incredibly well. That's not true either. The truth is somewhere in the middle. Join me. The Maker is an all-in-one 3D printer, CNC router, and laser engraver, and the first thing you need to know about it is it's beautiful. It is so well made. The first thing you notice when you open up the box is that all of the packaging is well laid out. Good God, everything about this packaging is beautiful. Look at this piece. It has the best instructions of any of these things that I've ever put together, bar none. I've gone through 4 diode laser engravers, and all of them had the worst packaging imaginable, and their instruction booklet was this big. One of them had pictures that were literally this wide, and the worst translations you've ever seen. This comes with its own brochure. Every component of the Snapmaker, the linear rails, the touchscreen enclosure, the power supply, even the control boxes that the cables plug into, it's all anodized aluminum, anodized and machined aluminum. It is so wonderfully made. If Apple made a 3D printer, this is probably not what it would look like, but it'd have the same build quality. Even the power supply here, it's got a machined grill. And behind that grill, color-changing LEDs. It has no reason to be this beautiful, but it is, and I like it. But is the Snapmaker all form and no function? Suspense builder. Well, let's start with the Snapmaker as a 3D printer. First of all, a disclaimer. As I understand it, to be classified as a 3D printing enthusiast, you must own at least 500 3D printers. I've only ever had 2 of them, so that makes me decidedly an amateur. So take everything I'm about to say with a modicum of sodium chloride. This is a really nice 3D printer, and I like it a lot. How does the Snapmaker compare to my dedicated 3D printer, an Ender 3 S1? I chose this mainly because it's cheap, but also because it's got a lot of features. It's got a filament runout sensor, it's got a direct drive extruder head, it has dual Z-axis lead screws, it's got a flexible removable print bed so you can easily pop your prints off, and it's got auto bed leveling with this little touch probe here. It's probably got some other things, but that's all I can remember off the top of my head. The Snapmaker has all of those, and while it doesn't have more features than the Ender 3 S1 here, it does the features that it has a lot better. The filament runout sensor, rather than being a tacked-on plastic box, is integrated into the print head. The bed height sensor, rather than being an inaccurate touch probe, is an inductive sensor right here in the print head. The bed itself has no manual compensation for bed level, which is a bonus because these bed level screws mean the print bed has tons of wiggle in it, and yes, the V-rollers are all the way tight. There's just so much wiggle in the mechanism that holds the bed down. In small prints that doesn't matter, but in large prints it's been causing me issues. As far as print quality goes, I used it to print this Benchy, and it turned out fine. But this is so much larger than my Ender 3 over here that I immediately put it to work and used it to finish printing my Tesla drive unit. I printed this black end cap here on the Snapmaker because this was going to be 4 separate jobs on the Ender 3. I printed this all in one go on the Snapmaker here. This has a 320 by 350 millimeter bed. This is 250 or 270 by 270. It's a square bed. And it printed this just fine. It's a little rough because that's how I set it. I turned the settings all the way down to draft mode so this would finish printing quicker. Now, the educated among you will know that this is an order of magnitude more expensive than this. So maybe it's not the best comparison. This is just what I have. So how does this compare to a dedicated 3D printer of the same price range, like a Prusa? I don't know. I've never used one. This is bigger, I know that for sure. One review I watched of this thing from a year ago complained about, in 3D printing mode, the noise. In that review, they said that the stepper motor drivers are incredibly loud, and this thing sounds like a jet engine taking off. I'm happy to report they have fixed both of those things. The stepper motor drivers are a little bit louder than the 3D printer, but nowhere near as intrusive as the one in that video, and the fan in this is currently on. Are there downsides? Yeah, a really small number of them that I've encountered. First of all, the print bed can only be heated up to 80 degrees Celsius, and it takes quite a long time to heat up. It took about 5 minutes to get it up to 60 degrees Celsius in my experience, which doesn't matter because when I start a print, I just walk away and do something else, so I'm not waiting on it. All of the axes are lead screws rather than belts, so it prints a bit slower than similarly priced 3D printers. It's faster than my Ender 3, but I imagine 3D printing enthusiasts, the kind with 500 printers, are going to want a little more from this price range. I feel like I'm being too nice and I should say more negative about it, but I genuinely like it as a 3D printer. It makes me hate my Ender 3 over here because I just have to keep working on this thing, realigning stuff, readjusting stuff. I don't have to do any of that with this because it's so hilariously overbuilt as a 3D printer. But that's because it's more than a 3D printer. Which brings me to the first disappointment of the Maker. Given the name of Snapmaker, I thought changing between the different modes would be a simple quick change process. Maybe there's some sort of clamping dovetail arrangement for the tool head, maybe there's some sort of cam clamps or some other quick release mechanism for the work surface. But no, it's screws. There's 4 screws holding the tool head in place, and 22 screws holding the work surface in place in the case of the 3D print bed. For the laser bed and the CNC table, there's only 14 screws. So there's different numbers of screws for the different types of bed, but it's worse than that because there are also different kinds of screws. The 3D print bed is held in by 22 countersunk screws, and the laser and the CNC are held in by 14 flat top screws, which is a lot to keep track of. Now, you may not care about this, but I see it as a big inconvenience and a big blockage to your creative workflow, and I think they could have done a better job. What I wanted was, but what I got was a slow change process between each mode. Maker CNC router. Set your expectations appropriately. This is my Stepcraft M1000, one of the best machines I own. This is far larger and an order of magnitude more expensive than the Snapmaker, so it doesn't make any sense to compare the two. So let's compare the two. The work surface on this is 3 feet by 4 feet. The spindle is 1,000 watts with a nice dust collection hood, and the collet is 1/4 of an inch. This work surface is 1 foot by 1 foot on the A350 model, and this spindle is 50 watts with an 1/8 inch chuck and no dust collection. To use this as a CNC router, like a doctor, you'll need patience. But if you don't expect too much from it, it's not bad. The Maker comes in the box with these 4 beautiful anodized aluminum end-mill targets, otherwise known as clamps, and they screw into this grid work of threaded inserts in the MDF work table, and it also comes with 2 router bits. There's one 1/16 inch flat end mill, which is the thinnest router bit I've ever seen, and of course I broke it almost immediately. Stop! Stop! And it also comes with this ball nose 1/8 inch end mill. I only attempted 2 simple CNC projects, and the first one failed 3 times. I wanted to make a simple little finger jointed box, but I couldn't because the Snapmaker software is really simple and easy to use, but it's a little too basic, and one of the features it was missing was the ability to fill it in a corner, which meant all of the corners of my finger joints would be round, so they wouldn't fit together. So instead I settled for a butt-jointed box, which just meant cutting out 6 rectangles out of a piece of plywood. And that failed because I forgot to add tabs, so when the first cut was done, the rectangle popped out and jammed against the router bit. Stop! Stop! By the way, cutting out that single rectangle took 15 minutes. And then the second attempt, you already saw how that failed. Stop! Stop! And that was my only flat end mill, so I took to Amazon and bought these 5 replacements. These aren't a 1/16 of an inch, they're an 1/8 of an inch. So enormous. And then the third attempt failed because, well, I don't know, I wasn't around to see it, but I was recording. After failing 3 times in a row, and to be clear, this was not the machine's fault, it was mine all 3 times, I decided to give up on making a tiny box and swapped out the tiny end mill for a tiny V-carving bit and made this sign. Isn't it cute? Just like the machine it was made on. I wasn't inspired with a failure of a box and an uninspired welcome sign, so I fired up Vectric V-Carve and did a V-carving. First one I tried was just a random letter on this block of wenge, and it turned out really, really well. By the way, if you're not familiar with what a V-carving is or how it differs from a regular router path, it'll take the point of that V-carve bit and follow it up the corners to make them more sharp. And it did an amazing job. Sure, it was slow because the bit is tiny, but it did a really good job. So then I took it a step further and engraved the word home into this block. This is oak, and it did it just fine. The details are just as sharp as they would be on my real CNC router. I'm really happy with this. If I had more time, I'd take this a step further and V-carve a positive out of this contrasting block of wenge, so I'd have something to glue and insert into this home lettering and have a V-carve inlay, and that would be fantastic. If you want to do it more simply, you could just fill this inlay with epoxy or something, but as is, it looks really good. This little CNC router is more capable than I thought it was initially. One thing this desperately needs, an emergency stop button. It doesn't have one. You can buy one from their website as a $45 add-on, but it doesn't come with it, and it definitely needs to. And there's no way to stop it on the touchscreen either. For example, if you want to run the boundary to make sure you're not going to hit any clamps, but forget to raise the tool head up first, there's no way to stop it.
Don't hit it, don't hit it, don't hit it! Oh God, it was so close!
If you hit the down button too many times in a row, there's no way to stop it.
Well, that's very wrong. It's gonna hit a clamp. It's gonna stop!
If you're running a job, there is a stop button on the touchscreen, but it doesn't do anything. If you hit the stop button, it then prompts you to say, are you sure you want to stop? Which always is the case. Then when you hit yes, it doesn't stop. It keeps going and finishes its current routine, and then it stops and retracts. There is no emergency stop functionality on this thing.
No, get away from the clamp! Stop! This needs an emergency stop button! Panic!
And yes, these mistakes are easy to avoid. Raise the tool head up before running the boundary so you don't run into clamps. Don't hit the down button too many times in a row. Double check before starting your run, etc., etc. But these mistakes are just as easy to make as they are to avoid, and that's why it needs some sort of method of emergency interruption. And yeah, there's no dust collection or any obvious way to add it, but it doesn't really matter. And to help with dust ingress on the lead screws, they have these steel strips here on the front of the linear modules that will do a pretty good job of keeping dust out, which is actually something this does better than my actual CNC router. By the way, I haven't mentioned it yet, the touchscreen. Very intuitive. It runs a version of Android with Snapmaker's overlay on it. And the control screen, especially for the CNC router, has everything you'd want. You can home it, move the axes around, set the work origin, run a boundary to make sure your path isn't going to hit into any clamps. The only two things I add are A, a stop button, and B, a way to move the axes around in continuous form. The only way you can move them now is in steps, so you just have to sit here tapping on it. You can move them in up to 10 millimeter steps, but I'd prefer to be able to tap and hold and continuously move the axes around. Aside from that, intuitive, I love it. Lasers are dangerous. This is a class 4 laser. If you look at it, it can blind you. These are the goggles that came with the Snapmaker. This one's for CNC, and this one is for lasers. If you have these over your eyes, they'll protect your eyes from the harmful laser rays. But the thing about goggles is they're easy to remove. In the course of playing around with this laser, for the short time that I played around with it, I accidentally looked directly at that laser beam without the goggles on 4 separate times. That's why I highly encourage you, if you're going to buy a Snapmaker, get one of the optional accessories, the enclosure. Now I know what you're thinking, that looks expensive. And you're right, if you buy this enclosure by itself, that's $600. And I could argue that $600 is a small price to pay to avoid going blind. But I don't have to make that argument. When Snapmaker first sent me the email for that thing, I looked up the pricing and everything, and there was a sale going on. You could get the Snapmaker by itself for a price, or you could get the Snapmaker and this enclosure as a bundle for the same price. So if you bought it as a bundle, this was free, and that's a heck of an upgrade. Unfortunately, they've updated the pricing since I last looked, and now the Snapmaker is even cheaper, so the bundle with this enclosure in it's about $200 over the base Snapmaker, but that's still significantly less than $600, even if it isn't free, and that's quite a big improvement on safety. And it's a really nice enclosure. Just like the Snapmaker, this is really well made. It has tri-fold doors on 2 sides, so it opens here, and then this part slides. This is my only complaint about the whole enclosure. Sometimes this can rack and get a little bound up. No big deal, but I thought I'd mention it. The touchscreen goes here, so you can control the machine from outside the enclosure. Tri-fold door on this side too. It has door open sensors, so it can stop lasering if you open the door. It has an integrated vent fan, so you can pump all the smoke that this thing generates outside of your house. It has a little spool holder right there for your 3D print filament. It has LED lights on top. It is very nicely integrated. It's more than just a box you stick your Snapmaker in. This is a finger jointed box I cut out of 1/4 inch thick plywood on my CO2 laser. This is the box I made on the Snapmaker. This is 1.5 millimeter basswood. The laser head that comes with the machine is 1.6 watts. The primary function of this laser is engraving, not cutting. Cutting is not its strong suit at all, but I still attempted it. I cut out this cute little gift box out of 1.5 millimeter basswood. This is actually one of the included projects with Snapmaker software. I cut out paper. Of course it can cut paper. And I cut out these shapes out of a thin sheet of plywood. And by thin, I mean 1/64 of an inch thick plywood. Did you know they made plywood this thin? That's 0.4 millimeters. And yes, it is actually plywood. There's 3 plies in this. Somehow. And yes, it can cut through that. Obviously, this is really thin. It's a pretty low bar. However, if you do want to do more laser cutting, well, this isn't the end of the world. They sell an upgrade option. They sell an upgraded laser head with 10 watts of power, which will be significantly more useful. Frankly, I think that should be the standard one, but whatever. This is the 1.6 watt that comes with it. When you plug the laser tool head in, it goes through a series of calibrations. The first thing it does is engrave a series of lines on your workpiece, thereby wasting it, and then it zooms out and uses the camera built into the bottom of the tool head to look at those and see which line is the thinnest so it knows what its focal length is. Theoretically, anyway, it failed both times for me and I had to manually tell it which line was the thinnest, but it should be able to autofocus. And then the second test is a camera calibration. You put a piece of paper underneath there, it engraves a series of lines, and then looks at it and somehow calibrates the camera using that info. And then when you actually want to engrave something, setting the focus height is not intuitive at all. Snapmaker calls this autofocus. What I thought that meant was there's a sensor of some sort on the bottom of the tool head that senses the height of the workpiece and then goes down to the height of the workpiece plus the focal length, and boom, the focus is set. But that's not how it works at all. When you go to engrave something, it gives you two options, auto focus and manual focus. When you hit auto mode, it asks you for the thickness of material, so you have to measure it and input the thickness in millimeters there. And then it'll just add the focal length on top of that. That's not automatic, that's manual. And if you hit the manual button, well, it looks like it doesn't do anything. This confused me for a long time until I realized what it's actually doing. When you hit manual mode, it turns the laser on at minimum power, which I didn't realize because at minimum power, you can't see it at all with the goggles on. So you have to take the goggles off to be able to see the laser beam, and you're supposed to lower the tool head down until the dot is as thin as possible. Without the goggles on, because with the goggles on, you can't see it, and that strikes me as not particularly safe. One of the benefits of most laser engravers is that no clamping is required for the workpiece. The laser head moves over the workpiece, and the only thing interacting with it is light, so there's nothing to move it around. The Snapmaker, however, the bed moves, so they had to add clamping. And someone at Snapmaker has a sense of humor because these are the clamps that they added for this laser bed. These are silicone plugs. You're supposed to jam these in between the slats of the laser bed, and yeah, that holds your workpiece in place. What a ridiculous concept. I went to Harbor Freight and got these clamps for $1 a piece. They work much better. These silicone, these are a joke, right? This form factor also has a couple benefits when it comes to lasering because there's infinite control of the Z-axis. One of the benefits would be autofocusing, but they kind of dropped the ball on that one. The other benefit is between each pass, if you're trying to cut through something, it can incrementally lower the laser head so it stays in focus as you cut through the material. It'd be a little bit more beneficial in the 10-watt laser head, but it's still helpful with this one. And that Z height stepping is easily controllable in the software. Speaking of the software, I found a bug. There was a parenthesis at the end of this. I put a parenthesis in there. I put things after the parenthesis. It refused to acknowledge the parenthesis, so it engraved an open-ended parenthetical even though I ended the parenthetical in the software. I'm sure it's a really simple bug, but hey, Snapmaker, fix that bug. Overall, great laser engraver, and if you upgrade it to the 10-watt head, it's going to be a really good diode laser engraver. And this slat design for the table is a really smart idea. This is not going to get damaged by the laser, and it has slats in it, which allows the smoke to pass through, so the bottom side of whatever you're cutting doesn't get all burnt up. And just like with the CNC, the laser could also use an emergency stop button, but it's far less critical with the laser because no bits to break. Although I did still manage to run the laser head into a clamp because, hi, I make mistakes. Oh, and by the way, this isn't the machine, this is me. I'm the crap maker. As I mentioned in passing, there is a camera in the bottom of this laser tool head, and yes, you can use it to take a picture of your work surface and see what you're going to be engraving on in the software. Probably doesn't work like you're expecting. It doesn't take one solid picture of the whole work surface. It takes 9 individual shots and then stitches them together. Snapmaker's control software is called Lubin, or Lubin? Lubin and Lubin go hand in hand. And it's very simple, it's very intuitive, it's very easy to use, and you can control all 3 functions of this machine in Lubin. And the Snapmaker has Wi-Fi, so you can remotely connect to it and control it from your laptop, like I'm doing now. The one downside of this, though, is that if you have your computer in a separate room as the Snapmaker, this functionality becomes a little bit annoying because the touchscreen becomes unfunctional, dysfunctional, non-functioning when you're connecting to it with a computer. For 3D printing, it has a built-in slicer, but I'll be honest, I never used it. I went straight to Prusa Slicer. Prusa Slicer already has a built-in profile for the Snapmaker, so I just used that. For lasering, there's built-in laser functionality, But you're not restricted to this. You can use light burn if you go through the setup process with this machine. And with the CNC section, I already said the CNC functionality is kind of basic, but again, doesn't matter because you don't have to use Lubin. You can use VCarve or Fusion 360 or whatever program you have that you want to use. Overall, the point is the software is fine, but it doesn't really matter because you can use whatever you want. I'm glad they didn't lock you into their software. Price. You're probably wondering how much this thing costs since I've been skating all around the issue. $1,800. And frankly, I don't know if it's really worth that much. But it doesn't matter because right now it's on sale. At the time of this recording, this machine only costs $1,170. If you get it as a bundle with the enclosure, that's $1,409. Significantly cheaper than the $1,800 it normally costs, and at that price, yeah, I think it's kind of worth it. Okay, so let's compare this to another all-in-one machine, the Stepcraft D-Series. The smallest of the D-Series, the D420, starts at $1,900. But that's in kit form. This didn't come in kit form, so let's add assembly. That's $500. And the base price does not include the router spindle. You know, the important bit? So let's add another $500 on for that. Then if you want to add the attachment, the 3D print head is $600, and the laser head, which is only 3 watts, is $700. This starts to look like a bargain. It's not really a fair comparison because the Stepcraft is a CNC router first. It will do CNC far better than the Snapmaker will, and this is a 3D printer first. This will do 3D printing far better than the Stepcraft will. And if you only want this in 3D printer form, they sell that, and that version right now is only $790, which is cheaper than the Prusa is in kit form. And frankly, I'm starting to consider one of those. And the beauty about that model is it's the same thing. So if you decided later on that you wanted to get into a little bit of CNC work, well, you can buy this tool head and the work platform as an add-on and just throw it right on because it's the same machine. I see this being a really fun option for someone who wants to get into making things but doesn't have much space. Maybe you live in an apartment and the only spare room you have is a closet. You're not going to start a business with this thing, but you can 3D print some fun things, do some 3D relief carving, make some signs, laser engrave your cat. Maybe don't do that last one. You could do a lot of fun things with this machine. Frankly, I like the Snapmaker a lot more than I thought I was going to, and I can see it being useful for a lot more people than I had initially imagined. In full disclosure, the main reason I accepted this Snapmaker review unit is because I've got a friend that wants one. So when I'm done with this video, I can give them a free machine, I get a video out of it, and Snapmaker gets some advertising. Everyone wins! Thanks for watching.